Dress Me in Your Colors. Written by King Pasta Water. Read by Arashi. Claude jumps back and fires an arrow at the charging Imperial soldier, head still reeling over Edelgard's betrayal and identity as the Flame Emperor. Beside him, Dimitri brandishes his lance and cuts down the men as they appear in his vision. Why attack now? Why did Edelgard reveal her plans now? Has she turned her entire house against them all? The sounds of fighting echo across the field and throughout Garreg Mach. Red light shines from across the way, the only way Claude knows where the mysterious professor is. He notches another arrow and hits the soldier sneaking up on Dimitri. The prince then swings his lance around once more, and the two of them can breathe for a moment. "Claude!" Dimitri yells, standing firmly by his side. "I cannot keep fighting like this!" "Then you have to run!" Claude intones as he fires another arrow into the shoulder of yet another Imperial. "Take shelter in the monastery!" But Dimitri shakes his head stubbornly, and Claude knows it's stubbornness, and not bravery, like so many others want to believe. "Garreg Mach is no longer safe. I cannot stay!" Though the words are spoken without waver, Claude can see the exhaustion painting his friend's face, not quite hiding the mad gleam in his eyes have taken, nor the dusky bag starting to form underneath. "Then go!" It almost hurt for him to say, but he knows Edelgard doesn't have enough sentiment to spare them. "Don't let Edelgard and her Imperial army take you. Go and live to fight another day." Dimitri clutches at his lance. It's a difficult decision. Claude already knows that he will fight until he no longer can, or the enemy, and it pains him to call Edelgard the enemy, but she isn't proving him wrong, falls back. Claude will cut down any and all in front of him, until he finds those in his own house, and he will lead them to safety. It's all he can do. But Dimitri has a kingdom to think about, more people than Claude has ever seen in his life, and Edelgard is trying to push his hand. Dimitri, he wants Edelgard's head severed and put on a spike for him to display in the Great Hall. Claude's hand flexes around his bow when he thinks of the princess that turned out to be the Flame Emperor, but he keeps his eyes on Dimitri, green locked into blue. A deafening roar interrupts them, and Claude jerks around to see a mighty wyvern, coloring a strange pale gray. No, white, descend upon the battlefield and swipe and claw at the Imperial army. It then rears its head back, and red light forms inside their mouth, and a beam fires from it. Claude feels himself flinch back into Dimitri as it razzes the village with its power, and he nearly flies out of his skin when he sees an all too familiar figure with mint green hair running towards it, when it gets pinned by the other beasts. Byleth attacks the crest beasts, gnawing at the wyvern, though why they are defending it, Claude doesn't know. But then it throws off the beasts and turns toward the professor, standing on its back haunches. "Why did you come?" It asks without asking. It didn't phrase it as a question at all. It sounded very anxious, though. With the same worry the Archbishop had shown mere minutes. Was it minutes? How long have they been fighting? How many soldiers had Claude shot down? Dimitri speared through. How many friends has Edelgard slaughtered? Ago. It's not a wyvern. It's a dragon. Claude darts his eyes around and sees the figure from their previous battle, the one who wore Tomas's body like a disguise. Solon smirks disgustedly and forms a ball of dark miasma, then throws the spell towards Byleth and the white dragon. Their beloved professor attempts to block the magic attack with their relic, but it pushes them back too far, and the side of the cliff crumbles beneath them. "Teach!" Claude feels himself shout as he watches them fall, heart dropping into his stomach, and then some. Dimitri closes a tight hand around his arm, and Claude realizes that he had just jolted forward, as if he could follow Byleth down the cliff himself. A short intake of breath that doesn't do anything to soothe the tightness in his chest, and he looks around again. The dragon is screaming at Solon, and spraying him and his posse with the red light. Dimitri is glancing around again, looking for Edelgard. Claude tries to expand his chest again, and turns to his longtime friend and ally. "Go, Dimitri! If you can't get to Edelgard alone, make sure your house is safe. That's what they deserve." "And what would I deserve?" he asks hoarsely, not exactly directing the question to Claude, but the other feels as if he should answer regardless. "You'll get your revenge. I promise. I have to go and get Teach." Claude looks down at the ravine beneath the monastery, fearing just what he'll find at the bottom. Looking back up at Dimitri, he shakes the prince's grip and holds out his arm for something else. Dimitri looks up at him with that same hard stare he's been giving the image of Edelgard in his mind, a withering glare that promises death. But then, slightly softens, enough to show Dimitri isn't angry at Claude for anything, for any of this, and the two embrace like brothers. "Come back to us, Dima. The Golden Deer promised to come back to the monastery in 5 years for the anniversary. Come back and show me you survived." He doesn't know why he says it, but there's a foreboding feeling settling deep in his gut, one he can't fight or swallow back. Claude takes another deep breath over Dimitri's shoulder, and breaks into a sprint when they separate. He loves Dimitri. He does. But Claude doesn't know what he would do if Byleth died. They spoke of his dreams so often together, and Byleth had given so much insight and support in their short time together. He can't stand to lose that. He can't. So he runs, and hopes he will find a completely intact, alive professor at the bottom of the cliff. Byleth is alive. Claude thinks he might cry when he reaches them, when he finds their moving chest, when he hears their slow breaths. He collapses against a broken stone wall and lets his heart breathe again, for the first time since he saw them fall. Sharp, gasping breaths turned into hitching sobs, and Claude squeezes his eyes shut against the onslaught of emotions writhing inside him. He's crying, sobbing, praying to the goddess to keep Byleth alive as long as she can, even if she is asleep once more. Claude presses the heels of his palms against his eyes and forces himself to breathe slower. He has to get the professor out of the open. Claude pieces himself back together and gingerly lifts the professor, who weighs too little for how much muscle they've accumulated. He takes them both further into the forest, where he knows a small cave is hiding. "We'll wait out the ambush," Claude says to them as he settles against the wall, keeping his professor close to him. He casts an anxious look to the entrance of the cave, where he can still hear screams and roars, and the felling of trees and rocks. He hopes those in his house make it out. Make it safe. He has his bow, his axe, and Byleth. All they have is each other. "Come at once." That is all the note says, brought to Claude via one of the Pegasus riders still taking shelter from the war in the monastery. Claude doesn't need any explanation or preparation. He slings his relic bow that doesn't need a quiver over his shoulder and mounts his wyvern, the powerful Judith II, that he did not name with the permission from the original Judith, nor does he ever intend on informing her, to set off for Garreg Mach. There is only one thing it could be after all. Byleth. Their health could be declining, or, perhaps, their heart has started to beat. That might be an improbable feat. However, since they had informed Claude of the experiment Rhea performed on them as a babe, and the reason for their non-existent heartbeat, it would be an interesting development nonetheless. Claude follows the Pegasus rider back to Garreg Mach, and tries not to think of all the things that could go wrong. Byleth's health is fine, thank the goddess, and their creststone heart is as still as ever, as is their hair that has Claude pausing. Seth didn't specify anything with his note, only beckoning Claude to the monastery post-haste. Any number of things could have been wrong with the professor, or the monastery, or the remains of the Golden Deer house. But no, nothing was wrong, exactly. But Byleth's hair seems to have grown substantially in the few months Claude has been gone. It hadn't changed a bit in the near 5 years since their fall. Whatever power Sothis had infused in his professor kept them in a divine coma and perfectly healthy. Their mint hair had stayed the same length it always had been since day one, that bandit attack all those years ago. But now it graces the floor beneath the stone bench they are laid upon in the goddess tower, still growing with a soft, golden light and fluttering in an invisible breeze. Claude watches, with Seth busying behind himself, doing something or the other, as white and red ribbons suddenly appear out of nowhere and braid themselves into Byleth's beautiful hair, as a circlet with the same adornments as Rhea's forms on their forehead, as his professor's clothes transform into that deserving of a goddess. Not much changes about the clothes, but golden threads weave themselves through most of it, as a white and gold jacket appears around his professor's shoulders, trailing a white and purple cloak, where their black coat had laid before. They become bejeweled as gold adorns their body in various places, their head and hair, their ears, their neck, their wrists, and their legs. Claude wonders for a scant moment if Byleth will freak out when, if, they awaken, knowing how the professor is and what they value. All of this frivolity is more Lawrence's style, if he's being honest. At the thought of his close friend, He remembers it's been almost 5 years since he's seen any of them. Almost exactly 5 years since the promise they made to return to the monastery. How fitting would it be if Teach were to awaken for that, to see everyone come together again after the nightmare that has been these past 5 years. "It's really her," Sedith breathes beside him, and Claude remembers his presence. He glances over at the man and sees his green eyes wide, mouth slack, posture relaxed yet poised, and arms at his side, no longer crossed. He seems shocked, astounded, and yet so afraid. "Who?" Claude asks. It's still Byleth, but does he mean the goddess? Sothis? Has he seen her before? In scripture texts? Rare paintings? Sedith's mouth slowly closes, and his throat clicks as he swallows. Dry. Sothis. She really managed to bring her back. It is quite the feat. Dangerous. Claude pauses, narrowing his eyes. He turns to the former right hand of the Archbishop. Rhea's experiment, you mean? Why did she want to bring back the goddess? Sedith startles slightly, and opens his mouth to deny it, probably. But Byleth asked Claude to accompany them to Flayn and his wife's grave. He knows that he is really Flayn's father, and he knows of the blood that runs through their veins. After all that happened before the Holy Tomb, before the fall of the Church, it isn't a stretch to come to further conclusions. How Flayn herself reacted to several of her housemates whenever Saint Setline was brought up, and Sedith, Saint Keyhole. The argument between Rhea and Edelgard in the Holy Tomb has been sitting in the back of his mind for years now. Yes, Sedith finally answers. Rhea was trying to bring back the goddess of this world, the progenitor god. He looks up at Claude, who realizes finally that he's grown a scant inch taller than him. She wanted to bring back her mother. Her mother? Sothis was Rhea's mother. Rhea is Saint Seros, then, Claude says faintly, mind racing and thoughts churning, and the words tumbling from his mouth before he can process them. You are Keyhole, and Flayn is Setline. Byleth was meant to be Sothis. Sedith's smile is pained. You always were one of the brightest students we'd had here at Garreg Mach in decades. Even if you were spending most of your time planning pranks or walking around at night, I knew if you actually graduated from the academy, you'd find out. I suppose I can find solace in the fact that we are alone in your time of revelation. Claude looks up at Sedith and blinks a few times. Do you think I'm gonna go and shout this from atop my wyvern? Honestly, Sedith, at least the appearance of that white dragon makes a lot more sense now. And why Byleth was trying to defend it, of all things. Silly Teach. Yes, that was Rhea. Solon and Kronya were a part of a group of people that are very old enemies of ours, and when Thalys appeared on the grounds, in league with Edelgard, well, I cannot say I would not have done the same had I retained my own ability. Completely understandable. Claude shakes his head, glancing back down at Byleth. His teacher sleeps on, undisturbed by their changes. Claude is sure they're going to be ravenous when they awake. However, on their more intense training days, they nearly ate as much as Raphael, which reminds him. It's almost been 5 years since we made a promise to come back here. Us golden deer. I wonder if anyone's going to come back. What with the war going on. Sedith looks at him. Really looks at him. Do you honestly think your friends will let a simple war stop them? Do you even remember how they were in the missions you took? Even Ignatz, the most reluctant of all of you, did not hesitate when he knew you would be waiting. Claude snorts. As it is, he is most likely traveling here with Raphael, and you know how those two get along. Always pushing each other to do better, taking care of others when one goes too far. Hilda would have charmed her way out of her own confinement and cut down any bandits standing in her way with her axe. Marianne at her side to heal her when she ignores her injuries. Lawrence would have had to sneak out, and, in a very ungentlemanly move, stolen one of his father's horses, only to run into Leonie along the way, and ride with her when he eventually has to admit that, even though he knows how to ride a horse, he cannot stand to, and we both know how devastating Lysithea is on the battlefield. Claude stares at the saint, stunned. What? Did you just lecture me out of my self-pity? He shakes his head and manages a laugh, scratching at his trimmed beard. He hasn't spent much time tending to it lately, but he should at least make himself presentable for the reunion that is to occur in the coming days. He turns back to Sedith with one last question, however. You said Sothis was Rhea's mother. Aren't all the saints children of the goddess? Sedith sighs, as if what he's about to say pains him. Perhaps it does, considering all Rhea has done. Rhea was the first of her children. When she made the rest of us, it did not feel as if we were as close to her. Sothis was still motherly, do not misunderstand, but she and Rhea had a special bond. And when she disappeared, exhausted of her abilities, Rhea spent centuries in grief before founding the church and beginning her experiments. In that time, I had already had Flayn and lost her mother. When I found Rhea, she was already lost to her obsession, though I did not know what it was until too late. I did not know she was sharing her blood with the knights, or placing creststones inside of children in hopes of bringing back our mother. I found out about Geralt just before Citri gave birth, dying in the process. He stops here, swallowing, rubbing a hand down his face, and holding it on his mouth for a moment. I helped him escape the church and Rhea's experiments with my limited powers as a child of the goddess, but she had already done enough damage. She replaced Byleth's heart with a very valuable creststone, giving them the Crest of Flames, the one that let them wield the sword of the Creator. Sedith glances up at Claude, eyes shining. Yes, and then Geralt returned with him in tow not 2 decades later, putting the most successful of Rhea's experiments back in her clutches once more. Claude shakes his head. That's partially my fault. Mine, Dimitri, Edelgard's. We expressed admiration for Teach's swordsmanship and practically begged them to come to the academy with us. He laughs a little self-deprecatingly. Byleth was the most amazing teacher us Golden Deer could have ever hoped for, and they even spent time talking to the others as well. They're far too good for us. Sedith nods, and they treated Flayn so well after the incident with those who slither in the dark. He takes another deep breath. They are another enemy we will most likely face, likely where Rhea is being held, if she is still alive. I'm not sure how your dear professor will react upon seeing her again, after everything is revealed. Claude shakes his head, growing serious again. Teach was never very comfortable around Rhea, but I wouldn't say they hated her. If we do find her alive, she'll have a lot of explaining to do once she's healed up enough to endure some heavy interrogation. Sedith almost smiles. Done by none other than you, of course. Claude smiles for him. Who else? Almost like drifting along a stream, they awaken slowly to light, streaming through stained glass. Puzzled, they try to sit up and shield their eyes against it. Try being the key word, because they are weighed down by a lot of clinking jewelry and long green hair? Startled, they push themselves up and fully take stock of themselves on the bench where they were laying. They're still dressed mostly in the armor they were wearing when they fell, though it is more ornate than they remember, and all the jewelry is new, as is the purple and gold cape. And the hair. It reminds them of the one that sacrificed herself to save them. They miss her. They even have braids hanging from the front, the locks interwoven with red and white ribbons, just like her. A smile twitches against their lips, and their eyes moisten, but they do not cry. Their color is not the same, anyway. The green is brighter, more like the Archbishop's. That takes the smile away instantly, and they drop their hands. A mirror would do them well of service, if they can manage to stand. They believe their legs are in working order. As they push themselves up, noting their lack of dizziness despite their lengthy rest. Years? How long exactly, though? They hear footsteps coming up the stairs. Heeled boots, like what riders wear. Their gait, though, is familiar, as is the jaunty tune the person whistles. The smile comes back. A head of chocolate-brown curls stops in the archway when the person spots them awake, standing, smiling. He's grown a beard while they've been asleep, but that's just more to look at, more to touch. He's still dressed in golds and yellows. A bow is slung on his back, and he still gazes at them with adoring, mischievous, verdant eyes. Teach! He breathes. His voice is deeper, too. Years have passed, they're sure, but how many they still don't know. Byleth, I should say. I'm not a student anymore, even if I'll always follow your lead. Your command. You've been out for a while. Kept me waiting. He slides closer, an easy smile masking the pain that flashes across his eyes, the longing that they're so familiar with. Now, though, they think they can do something about it. They open their arms for him, and he comes without hesitation, pulling them to his broad chest and tucking them under his chin. They fit perfectly under him, and it causes a warm, tingly thrill to run through them. Wetness springs to their eyes once more in the presence of Claude, the one they've shared so much with, the one they dream and aspire and plot and scheme with. "I'm sorry," they whisper to him. The last thing they've wanted was to hurt him in more ways. He's already been hurt. "How long have I kept you waiting, my dear?" Claude lets out a choked laugh. "It's been over 5 years since you fell into that ravine. It was one of the worst days of my life, Teach. Don't put me through that again. Please?" Byleth squeezes him tighter. "You came down and got me out, though, didn't you?" Claude jerks a little. "How did you know?" They shrug. Some things they knew, like the fact that they'd been asleep for years, that they were at the monastery still, that Claude and Sedith and Flayn had been nearby the whole time. Others, like how long exactly, what Claude looked like now, and how they themselves had changed. They hadn't known. Weird goddess powers. Claude presses another wet chuckle into their minty hair, and they both stand there for a few moments to simply enjoy each other's existence. Then Byleth pulls back. "Today's the day of the reunion," they say softly. Claude draws a slow breath that takes a moment to fill his lungs, and holds it before he lets it out. "It is. I've already been scolded about my silly anxieties, though, so please spare me another lecture." Byleth lets their mouth tick up. "I was going to say that I should probably get freshened up to see everyone again. If I've been sleeping for 5.5 years, it's also a surprise for you. I was going to show you the Holy Tomb business, but..." Their shyness stops at their words. "A surprise? All for little old me? Teach, you shouldn't have." "It won't be for you if you keep calling me that," they manage to joke. At Claude's stunned expression, they stick out their tongue. "You are the one putting distance between us now." Claude blinks at them a few times, before a laugh bubbles out of his throat. Then another one. "You got me there. I'll try and do better. Byleth." They smile at the Duke in front of them, and squeeze his hands once more, and escape the goddess tower to see if their personal quarters were disturbed in the last 5 years. Claude doesn't see them until later, when the rest of their former house has made it to Garreg Mach for the reunion. Claude tells them all that their dear professor has finally awoken, and that it's finally time to start pushing back against the Empire. If they can save the rest of their friends along the way, then the ones that truly need to die are Edelgard and her vassal Hubert, both formidable enemies. They are discussing this with Sedith and Flayn, settled along the back walls of the dining hall, who provided them with a wonderful welcoming meal when Byleth returns. Claude's mouth dries up at the sight of them. They've cut their hair. Not too much. Instead of dusting the floor like it had when they'd awoken, it now lies at their waist, and the braids in front are still woven with ribbons. Most of the jewelry has stayed as well, mostly the circlet and the bangles and the earrings. And, oh, their ears are also pointed like the others now, too. But there is now the addition of the golden necklace Claude had given them years ago for their birthday, the one they had accepted with genuine sincerity and sparkling affection, even when they had no idea what these emotions were. Gone is the black plate they had been wearing since they met, replaced with something that sparkles like gold. The silver gauntlets are too replaced with gold ones, and are bejeweled with green stones that Claude is suspicious of. They must match his eyes exactly, because his teacher, Byleth, is just that meticulous. The huge collar they had worn before is gone, too, and the black shirt that covers more skin, likely to bring more attention to the necklace. The chainmail leggings are still present, but their black boots are armored with gold. It brings attention to the cape, the gold and purple cape, because those are royal colors, complementary. But more importantly, gold is his color, and Byleth is there drowning in it. Claude does not notice himself standing from the table, nor does he hear the others' cries of joy at seeing their old professor. His mind is filled with Byleth, 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 and nothing else. For even thinking of this person as professor or teach would be a crime. This is his gift, his surprise, and it is lovely. Byleth's teal eyes track his movements from the table to standing in front of them, and they crinkle with clear amusement when he stumbles as his boots knock together. "You look regal," he croaks, voice rough with emotion. Were he 5 years younger, he would hide his face in his arms in his embarrassment. Now, his eyes blaze like emeralds, inlaid on Byleth's gauntlets. His mouth dry like the deserts they traversed in school. Fingers twitch, as if to draw his bow, and hit perfect bullseyes just to prove himself this one. I'd like to think I look Regan, they say with a smirk. Claude chuckles, and he's glad it comes out as raspy and dark instead of a choked and high like he feels like it should. That too. You look good in my colors. Almost too good. Claude sweeps his eyes over their form once more, vaguely registering Lawrence and Lysithia's groans and protests at their bold flirting. Lawrence is offended because Claude never began an official courting, and Lysithia because he and Byleth had been dancing around each other for far too long. To be fair, though, they very likely would have lost their job had they begun dating before. Claude glances at Sedith, where he can see him out of the corner of his eye. All the saint does is smirk, and tug Flame towards the kitchen, muttering about desserts. Well, if they have the blessing of a literal saint. After we win this war, I'm taking you back to Elmira, Claude says. After we win this war, I'm never calling you Claude again, Byleth returns. It's a fair compromise. Fair enough that Claude can only seal it with a kiss. Lawrence's sensitivities be damned.